You know how they say you'll always remember your wedding dress? I do. Not because I wore it, but because I watched my sister walk down a staircase in it, with my parents clapping and laughing like it belonged to her all along. Let me tell you what happened, and why that day, changed everything for me. 3 months before my wedding, Evan and I were finally hitting our stride. We'd just secured the venue, we'd agreed on the guest list, and after weeks of searching, I had found the dress. It was custom ordered, tailored for my body, with hand-sewn pearl accents and an understated train. I didn't want anything over the top, just something timeless, something mine. Since Evan and I were still living in a cramped apartment while saving for the honeymoon, I decided to store the dress at my parents' place, sealed, bagged, and tucked safely into the back closet of my old room. My mother had even said, "Of course, sweetie, it'll be safe here." The morning of my engagement photo shoot, I stopped by to pick it up. I had a flower crown in the passenger seat, a thermos of warm tea, and Evan was waiting at the park with the photographer. I parked in front of the house and walked in through the side door. My mother was in the kitchen, casually slicing strawberries. I said, "Hey, just grabbing the dress before I head out." She didn't look up. She said, What dress?" I laughed. "My wedding dress, the one in the back closet?" She wiped her hands and turned to me. "Oh, that. I'm sure it's around here somewhere." A strange cold prickle ran up my arms. "It should be in the black garment bag. I put it behind the old coats." She walked with me to the hallway closet, opened it, and started rifling through hangers like she was hunting for a sweater. Gone. No bag, no white satin, no dress. I stood there, heart pounding. I asked, "Did you move it?" She tilted her head and said, "Maybe I did. Or maybe Vanessa borrowed it." I blinked. "What?" My mother shrugged. "You know Vanessa, always playing dress up. Maybe she took it for a photo shoot or something. Don't panic, we'll find it." I stared at her, waiting for her to realize the magnitude of what she'd just said. "She took my wedding dress?" I asked. My mother sighed, walked back to the kitchen, and said, "Camille, it's just a dress. You still have time to find another if it's missing." The silence hit me so hard it rang in my ears. I left without the dress. I canceled the photo shoot. Evan didn't ask many questions, just held me while I cried into the crook of his neck that night, repeating, "I'm sure it'll turn up. Maybe it's just misplaced." But it wasn't. That evening, I got a text from my cousin Melanie. It said, "Vanessa's engagement party tonight at 7. Surprise thing, your parents are throwing it. Hope you're coming." I didn't know Vanessa was engaged. No one had told me. Not a word. Still, I told Evan, I should go. I need to see for myself. I wore a black sweater dress. Something plain, neutral. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted something to make sense. My parents' house was glowing with string lights and music. Guests spilled out onto the patio with glasses of rosé. There were white balloons with gold lettering. He put a ring on it. I slipped inside. And that's when time stopped. At the top of the staircase, in front of a crowd of cheers, descended my sister Vanessa, smiling like a queen. In my dress. She didn't just wear it. She'd altered it. The sleeves had been removed. The neckline was dipped. The pearl belt I chose was replaced with rhinestones. But I knew every inch of that fabric. I knew that hem, that lining, that ivory satin was mine. I said it aloud before I could stop myself. "That's my dress." People turned. Vanessa paused on the step, smiled wider, and said, "Oh, Camille, I didn't think you'd come." I stepped forward. "Where did you get that?" Vanessa reached the bottom stair and smoothed the fabric over her hips. She said, "You weren't using it. I figured why let it go to waste?" My voice cracked. "That's not yours." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Relax, I had it altered. Besides, I'm getting married first. You'll get over it." My mother appeared at my side, brushing imaginary crumbs off her cardigan. She said, "Camille, please don't make this about you." I stared at her. "You knew she took it." She pressed her lips together. "You said you weren't sure when your wedding was. Vanessa needed something fast. We helped her out." I looked to my father, standing proudly next to a banner that said, "She said yes." He shrugged and said, "Vanessa's always had a better eye for fashion." The alterations were genius. I opened my mouth, then closed it. People around me murmured. I felt the heat of 100 eyes, some pitying, some entertained. I turned. I walked straight out the front door. No one followed, not even Vanessa, not even my mother. And that was the day I realized something no one ever tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't always come from losing love. Sometimes it comes from watching people you trusted smile while they erase you. My dress was gone. My parents' loyalty, gone. Even my engagement felt like a joke now, as if it had never mattered to anyone but me. I didn't cry that night. I packed away every bridal magazine, every checklist, every plan. And in the morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight for a family who never once fought for me. Let them have their party. Let her wear the dress. But one day, I'd be the one they'd regret cutting out of the picture. And when that day came, I wouldn't need a white gown to make an entrance. I didn't disappear. I left. There's a difference. When people disappear, it's usually by accident. Grief, shame, depression. But when I left, it was on purpose. Every step, every silence, every burned bridge. Evan understood before I even said the words. We sat on the floor of our apartment 2 days after the party, eating leftover Chinese food out of the containers. Both of us quiet. He put down his chopsticks and asked, "Do you still want to get married?" I nodded, but not like this. Evan said, "Then let's do it our way. Somewhere no one knows us." He didn't mean run away forever, but I did. I opened a map, pointed to a random speck on the coast that neither of us had ever visited, and said, "There." Evan looked at the name of the town. "Grey Ridge? Sounds like something out of a novel." I said, "Perfect." We packed everything we owned into 2 cars, canceled the big wedding, told no one, not even our closest friends. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about shedding the weight of a world that never wanted us to rise. Grey Ridge was smaller than we expected. Windy, moody. Tourists skipped it in favor of the brighter towns to the north. The beaches were quiet, the boardwalk half abandoned, which made what we found even stranger. It was an inn, or what used to be one. 3 stories, wraparound porch, slate roof half caved in on one side. The windows were clouded, and the sign had fallen off the front, leaving only rusted screws and a ghost of painted letters. The Grey Rock Inn. It was listed for half the cost of our wedding budget, which, after canceling the venue and the caterer, was still sitting untouched in our joint savings account. Evan said, "You're not seriously considering this." I said, "Why not?" He laughed. "Because it's falling apart. Because we've never owned anything. Because this is insane." I stepped closer to the porch, letting the wind whip through my hair. I said, "She got the dress. I'll take the fire." Evan stared at me. I said, "I don't want the life they would have clapped for. I want a life they'll never understand." He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was with keys. We bought it 1 week later. Everyone said we were out of our minds. But the beautiful thing about vanishing from your life is that the only opinions you hear are your own. The first month, we slept in sleeping bags on the top floor, a room with half a ceiling and no working heat. Evan taught himself basic carpentry through YouTube videos. I painted walls while wearing gloves. We lived off ramen and peanut butter and borrowed electricity from a neighbor while we rewired the main breaker. It was hell, and it was ours. We scrubbed mold out of showers, sanded floors, patched drywall, negotiated with the bank, and fought off raccoons in the attic. By month 3, we'd opened up 2 rooms to paying guests, mostly fishermen and lost travelers. One night, we got a knock at the door during a storm. I was wearing an old hoodie, drenched from trying to close a broken window. It was a woman, probably in her 40s, soaked and breathless. Her car had broken down on the road, and her phone had died. She didn't ask if we were open. She just said, "I need somewhere warm." We gave her a room, hot tea, a dry blanket. She asked my name, and I said, "Cam." The next morning, she posted a photo of the view from her window with a caption, "Stormed into this little inn off the map last night. Place feels haunted, in the best way." She had 800,000 followers, I didn't find that out until a week later, when our inbox was flooded with booking requests. Evan stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, reading messages out loud. Evan said, "Someone wants to book for 2 nights and asked if the tea comes with poetry." What does that even mean? I laughed. She must have liked the handwritten note I left on her tray. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. "You wrote her a poem?" I shrugged. She looked like someone who needed it. That became our thing. Handwritten notes for guests, poems, quotes, small things that made people feel seen. Word spread. Then photos. Then articles. Most romantic unknown inn on the East Coast. A hidden gem on the Grey Ridge Bluffs. Who is the mystery woman behind Grey Rock? I never posted a photo of myself. Never used my last name. Didn't need to. The mystery became part of the brand, and I liked it that way. My name had been used like a punching bag for years. I didn't need to slap it on a website now. We expanded to 5 rooms, then 7. A dining room with fresh bread every morning, homemade candles in every bathroom. Evan installed a fireplace with his bare hands. People came, people loved it. And Vanessa? Still perfect online. Still posing in designer dresses with captions like, "When your life matches your dreams." She had no idea where I was. No idea what I was building. And that was the best part. Every time I looked at the ridge behind the house, where gulls flew against gray skies and waves crashed on rocks below, I thought, this is mine. Not because they gave it to me, but because they never believed I could have it. For 2 years, we never saw a single familiar name. Until one night, sitting in the office with tea and a lit candle, I opened a new booking inquiry. Last name, Hartley. First name, Vanessa. I blinked. I clicked the form. She wanted to stay for 3 nights. Bridal suite, anniversary getaway. She had no idea whose door she was knocking on. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "Oh, this is going to be interesting." Some things you plan, others you let unfold like a slow burn candle. When I saw the name Vanessa Hartley come through the booking portal, I didn't react right away. I just stared at it. The request came through at 2:43 a.m. 3 nights, bridal suite, anniversary trip. Attached was a short note. "Escaping some drama online. We just want a peaceful private stay. No press, no fans. Please be discreet." I laughed out loud when I read that last part. I turned to Evan, half asleep on the couch beside me, and said, "You're not going to believe this." Evan rubbed his eyes. "What?" I held up the screen. "Vanessa." He sat up. "You're Vanessa?" I said. "There's no my Vanessa." "But yes, my sister just booked our inn. For her anniversary." He blinked. "She knows you run it?" I shook my head. "She doesn't even know where I live. She probably thinks I'm still sulking in a studio apartment somewhere." Evan raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to cancel it?" I stared at the screen, then slowly smiled. I said, "No. I'm going to roll out the red carpet." He leaned back. "Oh boy." I didn't tell the staff. Not yet. We had a new assistant manager, Maddie, a smart, quick-witted 20-something who had no idea about my family history. She was the perfect buffer. The morning of Vanessa's arrival, I walked the entire property twice, checked every room, touched up the wax on the hardwood floors myself. Then I went to prepare the bridal suite. The suite had a clawfoot tub overlooking the sea, embroidered linens, and a collection of antique perfume bottles arranged on a mirrored tray. I fluffed the pillows, folded the robe just so, and paused at the full-length standing mirror near the closet. I studied it. Then I slowly turned it toward the wall, facing backward. Useless. I said aloud to the room, "Let's see what she notices when she can't look at herself." That afternoon, the car pulled up. I stayed behind the curtain in the office, watching the drive through the security camera feed. Vanessa stepped out of the passenger seat wearing designer sunglasses and an oversized white trench coat. Her husband followed with 2 matching suitcases, leather, monogrammed, loud. They entered the lobby like they expected applause. Maddie stood at the front desk with her usual bright tone. Maddie said, "Welcome to Grey Rock Inn. You must be the Hartleys." Vanessa slid off her sunglasses and gave a tight smile. Vanessa said, "We booked the bridal suite. I assume everything's been arranged?" Maddie smiled. Of course. We have sparkling cider and fresh fruit in your room, and breakfast menus in the binder. I'll take you up personally. Vanessa scanned the lobby. Vanessa said, "Is Camille here?" Maddie blinked. "Camille?" Vanessa said. "She's the owner. Or at least she was. Years ago." Maddie smiled. "Oh, Camille doesn't work the front anymore."
Vanessa waved a hand. "Figures. Anyway," Maddie added, "she owns the place now." Vanessa looked up, confused. Vanessa said, "Owns. Wait, Camille owns it?" Maddie nodded. "Yup, it's been hers from the beginning." Vanessa gave a half laugh as if she didn't quite believe it, as if maybe Maddie was misinformed. From the office, I turned off the audio and sat back. I didn't want to see her face just yet. Let her try to figure it out on her own. Upstairs, Maddie unlocked the bridal suite and gestured grandly. Maddie said, "You're home for the next 3 days." Vanessa stepped inside, eyes scanning. Vanessa said, "This is cute." Her husband, name unknown, face forgettable, dropped the bags and yawned. He said, "I'm gonna nap. Don't make dinner reservations too early." She ignored him. Vanessa walked the perimeter of the room, opening drawers, peeking behind curtains, lifting the edge of the comforter like she was inspecting for lint. Then she stopped. Vanessa said, "There's no full-length mirror?" Maddie looked around. "Oh, that's weird. There's usually one. Maybe housekeeping moved it to avoid the afternoon glare? I'll check with them." Vanessa frowned. Vanessa said, "How am I supposed to get dressed for dinner without a mirror?" Maddie smiled. "You look great already." Vanessa didn't laugh. She walked over to the wall and flipped the mirror around, only to see the backboard. She stood there for a beat, arms crossed. I watched the footage later that evening. She looked frustrated, like something about the room didn't sit right with her. It was beautiful but unfamiliar, designed for someone else's love story, someone like me, and that's exactly what I wanted her to feel. The rest of the day passed without issue. They ordered room service. She posted a few filtered shots of her dinner, a sea-based dish that Evan had spent hours perfecting, and tagged the inn without mentioning names. Her caption read, "A peaceful escape. No trolls, no noise, just elegance." I rolled my eyes. For someone hiding from a cyberbullying scandal, which I'd later learn involved leaked DMs where she mocked a disabled fan, she was remarkably eager to be seen. The next morning, I stepped into the dining room while Maddie prepped coffee. I said, "Anything I should know?" Maddie smiled. "The Hartleys were quiet. She's intense." I nodded. "That's one word." Then I added, "Tell her I'll be delivering breakfast myself tomorrow morning, just a courtesy." Maddie blinked. "You?" I smiled. "Yup, let's make them feel special." That night, I sat in my office, lit a candle, and flipped through an old photo album. There it was, the dress, the one she'd stolen from my closet, me holding it up in front of the mirror, smiling at my reflection, unaware. She stole that from me. But now she was sleeping in my room, drinking my wine, posting filtered photos of my life, and she still had no idea. I leaned back, watching her blurred silhouette through the camera positioned in the stairwell. I said quietly to myself, "Let's see what you do when you meet the real owner." There's a particular kind of silence before a reckoning. It's not loud. It doesn't knock. It slips in under the door, takes a seat at the head of the table, and waits for you to notice it. And on the second night of Vanessa's stay, that silence was everywhere. It had been on the calendar for months, a private charity dinner hosted at the inn. Every year, we did one, invite only. A handful of local business owners, donors, art patrons, and former Grey Ridge residents who supported our inn when it was nothing but scaffolding and dust. I didn't change the date when Vanessa booked. In fact, I added 2 more names to the guest list. Mr. and Mrs. Greenfield, our old neighbors, the ones who used to invite my parents over for 4th of July cookouts. They hadn't seen me since I left town. Vanessa had kept in touch from what I'd gathered, but I knew exactly who they were coming to see tonight. Me. By 7, the lobby glowed with low candlelight. The long dining table was draped in ocean blue linen, set with bone-white china and crystal glasses. Evan stood by the fireplace in a tailored black jacket, chatting with guests. I was upstairs, getting ready. I slipped on a deep emerald green dress, high neckline, open back, simple but striking. the kind of dress no one forgets. I tied my hair back, slid in gold earrings, and for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and said aloud, "I'm not hiding anymore." Downstairs, the guests arrived one by one. Laughter echoed in the foyer. Champagne flutes clinked. I could hear someone near the fireplace say, "Is she really the one who built all this?" And another voice answered, "She bought the place with nothing but guts, rebuilt it from the studs, no loans, just determination." I stepped out onto the landing, hand resting lightly on the railing, just as Vanessa cracked her sweet door across the hall. She was in a robe, her makeup half done, hair pulled into rollers. Vanessa asked, "What's all that noise?" I smiled politely and said, "Just a private event." She frowned. "What kind of event?" I said, "Charity dinner. We do it every year." Vanessa asked, "Why didn't we get an invite?" I tilted my head. "It's invite only." She blinked. Then I turned and walked down the stairs. I didn't need to see her reaction. I could feel it chasing me down every step. By 8, the dining room was filled. Conversations sparkled. The food, seafood risotto, freshly baked sourdough, vanilla panna cotta with berries, was plated with care. The Greenfields approached me mid-course. Mrs. Greenfield said, "Camille, this place is extraordinary." Mr. Greenfield added, "Your sister said you'd moved away after the wedding didn't happen. We had no idea you were here." I smiled graciously and said, "It's been a quiet rebuild." They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. I was center stage, and every inch of this place, every flicker of candlelight was my applause. At dessert, I took a plate upstairs myself, vanilla panna cotta topped with a sugared edible flower. I knocked once on Vanessa's door. She answered in leggings and a hoodie now, phone in hand. I said, "Just thought you'd enjoy something sweet." She looked down at the dessert. Vanessa asked, "What's the occasion?" I handed her a folded note with it. She opened it and read silently, "Hope you're enjoying the view." See. Her mouth twitched. She asked, "Why didn't you invite me?" I said, "You're not on the list." Vanessa said, "I'm your sister." I answered, "Exactly."
Then I turned and walked away. Later that night, while I was pouring wine for the guests, Maddie rushed over from the lobby, flustered. Maddie said, "Your sister's trying to come downstairs." I said, "She wasn't invited." Maddie whispered, "She's saying she has a right to be here. Guests are starting to notice." I nodded once and signaled to Jordan, our security contractor who we hire for events. Tall, calm, professional. He stepped to the bottom of the staircase just as Vanessa reached it, now in heels and a red cocktail dress. Jordan said, "Excuse me, ma'am, this is a private function." Vanessa said, "I'm a guest here." Jordan replied, "Yes, in the bridal suite. This event is by invitation only." Vanessa said, "Do you even know who I am?" Jordan answered, "Yes. And the list still doesn't include your name." Her voice dropped low. Vanessa said, "This is ridiculous. I'm not some random outsider. I'm family." Jordan held his ground. He said, "I'm following the owner's instructions." Vanessa's voice cracked. Vanessa asked, "Then let me speak to her." I stepped forward from the shadows of the dining room. I said, "You just did." She turned, eyes narrowing, breath catching like she'd been slapped. Vanessa said, "You?" I smiled. I said, "Me." She stood there at the foot of the stairs, the glow of the dining room behind me flickering across her stunned face. Vanessa didn't speak right away. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like she'd been handed the ending to a story she didn't even know she was in. I didn't say anything either. I wanted the silence to stretch, to sit with her the way I had. That night she wore my dress and smiled like it had always been hers. Vanessa finally spoke. Vanessa asked, "This whole place, it's yours?" I said, "From the ground up." Vanessa looked past me into the dining room. The laughter, the soft music, the light-catching crystal glasses, and the way people leaned in when I spoke. She whispered, "I didn't know." I stepped closer and said, "Of course you didn't. You never looked." She took a step back, arms folded tightly across her stomach. Her voice dropped lower, defensive. Vanessa said, "Why wouldn't you just tell me?" I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. I said, "Tell you? You mean after you stole my wedding dress?" Or after our parents told me to let it go? Or maybe after you announced your engagement in the dress I picked out for my day?" She looked down. Her voice cracked. Vanessa said, "I didn't know it would hurt you that much." I tilted my head. I said, "That's the difference between us. I'd never hurt you to feel powerful." She swallowed hard, mascara clinging to the corners of her eyes. I added, "You didn't just take a dress. You took the moment I was meant to feel beautiful. You stood at the top of those stairs like a queen in a crown that wasn't yours, and you let them cheer for you." Vanessa's chin trembled. Vanessa said, "They always expected me to shine. I didn't think anyone would care if I borrowed it. I didn't think—" I cut her off gently. I said, "Exactly. You didn't think, because you've never had to." She leaned against the wall, suddenly looking smaller. Not the glamorous Vanessa from Instagram. Not the perfect daughter. Just a woman trying to keep the glitter from slipping off. I asked, "Where is he?" She blinked. "Who?" I said, "Your husband. The one who brought your bags in." She looked away. Vanessa said, "He left this morning, took a train back to the city." I nodded. "You didn't post about that." She gave a dry laugh. Vanessa said, "My followers wouldn't know what to do with the truth." I raised an eyebrow. I said, "Maybe you wouldn't either." She sat down on the bench near the base of the stairs, rubbing her hands together. Vanessa said, "The brand's collapsing. I lost 2 sponsors after the last mess." I asked, "Was that before or after the leaked screenshots where you called a disabled fan a PR stunt waiting to happen?" She looked up sharply, eyes wide. Vanessa said, "You read that?" I said, "I read everything. You're not as untouchable as you think." She didn't deny it. For once, she had no spin. Vanessa whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." I knelt down in front of her, leveled my voice. I said, "Good. Because the version you've been playing, the version that steps over people just to be taller, that version was never real." She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there, shaking slightly, her palms flat on her knees. After a long moment, she asked, "Why didn't you kick me out the second you saw the reservation?" I stood up, walked toward the lobby window, and stared at the ocean beyond. I said, "Because I wanted you to see what I built when no one believed in me." She said nothing. I turned back to face her. I said, "Because I wanted you to know I let you stay, that the keys you held were mine, that every bite of food you ate, every candle you photographed, I chose to give that to you." Her mouth opened, but I raised a hand to stop her. I said, "Not because you deserved it, but because I needed to know I could do it." She finally stood. Vanessa said, "So now what?" "You've made your point." I nodded slowly. I said, "Almost." She looked at me warily. Vanessa asked, "Almost?" I walked to the front desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folded contract. I handed it to her. She scanned the top line and frowned. Vanessa said, "Employment contract?" I said, "Part-time cleaning manager. 15 hours a week, $17 an hour. Weekends required." Her eyebrows shot up. Vanessa said, "You're offering me a job to clean your inn?" I said, "If you're really sorry, show up. And scrub like the rest of us." She stared at the paper. Vanessa said, "You think this is funny?" I shook my head. I said, "No. I think it's honest work. And I think it's the only thing that'll make a dent in that ego you've been dragging around like a designer purse." She looked at me, eyes darting, lips pressed tightly together. I added, "You don't get forgiveness just because you showed up in tears. You earn it. One towel at a time." I walked past her, back toward the dining room. Before I reached the door, I turned over my shoulder. I said, "The shift starts tomorrow at 6. Or don't come. Either way, you'll leave knowing exactly who I became without you." I didn't wait for an answer. But when I glanced back, the contract was still in her hands. And her face? Silent. Still. Processing the weight of everything I hadn't said. 3 days passed. No word. No message. No contract returned. Vanessa left the next morning in silence, just after sunrise. She rolled her suitcase down the gravel path herself. No driver. No dramatic goodbye. Just one last look at the porch before disappearing into the fog that clung to the coast. And I thought that was the end of it. But on the fourth morning, just after the breakfast shift had started, Maddie came into the kitchen, wide-eyed, holding a to-go mug with shaking hands. Maddie said, Camille? I turned from the stove. I said, "What's wrong?" Maddie leaned closer and whispered, "She's back." Vanessa, I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked out to the front desk. And there she was, hair pulled into a low bun. No makeup, sweatshirt, jeans, sneakers. Nothing designer. No gold bracelets, no diamond studs. Just Vanessa, stripped down to whatever was left beneath the brand. She looked at me and held out the contract. It had been folded and refolded so many times the edges were soft and worn. Vanessa said, "I signed it." I didn't move. I asked, "Why?" Vanessa took a breath. Vanessa said, "Because you were right. I don't know who I've been pretending to be, but I know it isn't working anymore." I nodded once, then took the paper. I said, "Training starts now." Her first assignment? Folding towels. I brought her to the laundry room and showed her how to separate by color and fiber weight, how to fold them in threes and roll them to fit the spa bins. She watched, nodded, mimicked, fumbled at first. I didn't comment. She worked quietly. Then came the windows, then the sand that the wind always pushed against the doors by the terrace, then room service runs, and she didn't complain. Not once. She carried trays, took orders, learned the phone script. I watched her mop the lobby floor in the evening. She didn't notice I was there. She just moved with a kind of tired grace I hadn't seen in years, the kind that comes when someone's building something from nothing. By the third day, Maddie asked me, "She's really working here?" I said, "She's earning something." Maddie asked, "Forgiveness?" I answered, "We'll see." The guests didn't recognize her. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. There were no whispers of scandal. No one asked for selfies. It was like the world had shrunk down to this one inn, these few rooms, these floors she swept like she was sweeping her own past away. One night, near closing, I found her on the porch. She was sitting on the step, elbows on her knees, watching the moonlight ripple across the ocean. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she broke the silence. Vanessa said, "You built this whole thing. Alone?" I looked out at the dark sea. I said, "No. With everything you left me. Anger, shame, silence." I paused, then added, "I made them into walls. And a roof." She looked down at her hands. Vanessa said, "You know, I always thought I was the strong one. I thought being loud made me brave." I said, "Being loud just means you can't hear the damage you're causing." She didn't flinch at that, didn't argue. She nodded. And that was the first moment I saw something real in her again. Not Vanessa, the sister who'd stolen my dress. Not Vanessa, the influencer, the pride of the family. Just the girl I used to build blanket forts with on rainy days. The one who used to ask me to braid her hair before school. The version of her I hadn't seen in over a decade. The next morning, she was in the supply closet organizing the cleaning products by label. She made a checklist. Labeled everything. Maddie walked by and said, "Huh, neater than my apartment." Vanessa didn't smile. She just kept working. Later that day, I called her into the office. She looked hesitant, like she expected me to say, "It's been nice, now go." But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out a small silver key and set it on the desk between us. I said, "This is to the supply closet, not the kingdom. There's a room in the back of the inn. It's not on the website. No one ever asks to see it. But it's mine. We use it for seasonal storage, extra linens, boxed-up decorations, an old Christmas tree with a crooked star. I keep the key on a hook inside the office, behind the door. I hadn't stepped inside that room in almost 3 years. Until last week. It was a quiet afternoon. Rain fell in slow streaks across the glass. Guests were out for the day, and the inn was still. Evan was sanding a windowsill in one of the upstairs rooms. Vanessa was refilling hand soap bottles in the guest bathrooms. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and reached for the farthest rack. The garment bag was still there. Black canvas, a bit of dust on the zipper. I slid it off the rod and laid it gently across the wooden table near the window. I stared at it for a moment. Then I pulled the zipper down, slow and steady. There it was. My wedding dress. Still perfect. Still untouched. The satin hadn't yellowed. The lace was still delicate and intact. It looked exactly the way it had the day I first tried it on, before she wore it, before they laughed, before I walked away. I ran my fingers down the bodice, closed my eyes. I said softly to the room, I never wore it. But I wore what came after. That was the truth. I wore the silence, the rejection, the fury. The nights I cried into Evan's shoulder without saying a word. I wore it all. And somehow, I'd turned it into something that fit me better than any gown ever could. I didn't cry. I folded the dress carefully, placed it in a new box, wrapped it in white tissue, and tied a soft ribbon around the top. Later that week, I drove it to a women's shelter 2 towns over. They had a program that helped survivors rebuild: housing, job placement, therapy, and once a year, a bridal event. I handed it over to a kind woman named Carla at the front desk. Carla asked, "You sure you want to part with this? It's gorgeous." I said, "I never got to wear it, but I'd like to help someone else feel beautiful in it." Carla nodded. Carla said, "She will. Whoever she is." I left without looking back. The sea air felt lighter when I got home. A month later, Evan and I stood barefoot on the beach just before sunset. The tide was pulling gently, and the sand was still warm from the day. Our guests stood in a loose half-circle: Maddie, Jordan, a few old guests who had become friends, and even some of the locals who helped us get the inn running in the early years. It wasn't a wedding. Not officially. It was a vow renewal. No tuxedos, no bouquet toss, no aisle. Just us. Evan wore a white linen shirt and khakis. I wore a loose pale blue dress that danced in the wind. My hair was down. No veil, no ceremony music. Just the sound of the water and a breeze whispering through the dune grass. We stood facing each other, hands clasped. Evan said, "You've been my anchor in every storm." I said, "You've been the quiet I needed when the world was too loud." We didn't need a minister or a contract. We'd already done the work. This was just a promise, not to love perfectly, but to keep trying. When we kissed, the crowd clapped softly. Nothing too loud, just enough. And off to the side, I saw her, Vanessa, standing a few feet behind the others. Simple dress, no makeup, hair in a braid, no camera, no phone, no audience. Just her. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She just watched. Quietly. I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not jealousy, not resentment, just humility. And maybe something close to peace. After the ceremony, while guests toasted and laughed by the bonfire, I sat alone on a driftwood log near the edge of the beach. Vanessa approached and sat beside me. We didn't speak for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret not wearing the dress?" I shook my head. I said, "No. It wasn't meant for the life I was supposed to have." She nodded. Vanessa said, "It was never mine to wear." I didn't respond, because she already knew the answer. She stood up and walked back to the firelight. I let her go. Some things you don't have to chase anymore. Later that night, I stood on the porch alone. The stars were out, glittering like tiny truths we can never quite grasp. The sea rumbled in the distance. The inn was quiet again. I thought about everything that had led here. The dress, the silence, the rebuild. The moment Vanessa stepped back into my life like a question I hadn't asked. And now? Now she was part of the answer. Not the villain, not the victim. Just someone trying, like me, to figure out who she really was without the applause. I smiled to myself and whispered aloud, "She stole my dress. But I got the life that fit."